Hi, I'm Gene Bergman. I'm a Ward 2 City Councilor, and welcome to Burlington Progressives TV. We've got a show on the housing crisis, the housing issue that we all know what we're facing, with some really great guests. Thank you all for coming. Michael Monty, and Kate Logan, and Frank Knack, and Emma, there you go, Jess Hyman, and you guys are really deeply embedded in the work of housing in our community, which includes not just Burlington, but the county and the state. So I'm going to ask you to go around and just introduce yourselves a little bit, because although you guys all know a lot of people, we don't know everybody, so get a chance. So
great.
Michael?
Michael Monty, so I'm the Champlain Housing Trust CEO, and I've been working there since 2006. But I worked for the city of Burlington off and on for 19 years and did a lot of neighborhood and community organizing, and been in and out of the housing world, but certainly definitely in it for the last bunch of years. And
like 45, 50
well,
years? We go back a long way,
So I was going to say,
Michael.
I first met Eugene marching on City Hall, demanding rent control is our goal. And that was in '78 or something like that. So it goes back.
We haven't really cracked that nut, have we?
No.
We'll end up talking about that.
Yeah. Okay.
And Kate?
Hi, I'm Representative Kate Logan. I represent the Chittenden 16 district, which includes this neighborhood here, Central Old North End, and downtown Burlington. I'm also the chair of the board of directors at Bright Street Housing Cooperative, just a couple blocks away. That is a legacy of the work that you did in now Senator Sanders' mayoral office.
Yeah, and I mean, that's on an old brownfield site, if I'm not mistaken, right? You also have other work that you do that impacts housing, right?
Yeah, I'm the director for the Vermont Coalition of Runaway and Homeless Youth Programs. So that's a statewide, federally funded network of providers who provide emergency shelter for 12 to 17-year-olds and transitional housing and tenant-based rental assistance to 18 to 24-year-olds.
So there's a real connection with state work and with the needs of a really discrete and essential part of our community.
Yeah.
So,
and I'm on the Committee on Environment in the House, so we do land use there.
Big stuff. See, I told you this is going to be exciting. Frank, who are you?
Hi, Frank Knack. I'm with the Housing and Homelessness Alliance of Vermont. And at HHAV, we wear two interconnected hats. On one side, we do policy advocacy, so we work from the local to the federal level on issues related to affordable housing and homelessness prevention and response. In the other hat we're what's called the collaborative applicant for the Balance of State Continuum of Care. And what that really means is we are the staff for one of Vermont's two HUD-mandated entities that are really about homelessness prevention and response at the local level and at the regional level. And so as the collaborative applicant for the Balance of State, we really staff the local housing coalitions in all the areas of Vermont, minus Chittenden County.
So, Alliance.
Yes.
Who's in the Alliance?
So we have many members from across Vermont, so the Housing Trust.
All of us.
The Catholic Liberty Trust. Yes.
Old Home Week.
Yes, everyone who really is invested in and cares about homelessness prevention, response, and affordable housing across the state.
And the connection with the state has got to be fairly deep, at least on that second hat.
Oh, absolutely. I mean, we spend a good chunk of January through June in Montpelier advocating for policies and reforms around all the issues that I assume we'll talk about tonight.
And connections with our fine federal government. I'll have
Yes.
to watch my mouth, maybe, on this. Okay.
Yeah, well, we definitely have very, very deep concerns about what's happening federally right now and the potential impact in Vermont.
So far, we've got great fodder for great conversation here. Jess Hyman.
Hi.
Tell us. Yeah.
Sure. I've been doing community-based work for many decades in community journalism and food systems, community development.
We work at a community garden
we
right
do,
down the
yep.
hill. You help my wife who runs the Tommy Thompson. Yeah, very important. Thank you.
That's right, yeah. We've got to keep growing our own food and growing it together.
Yeah.
I've been in the housing world for about 7 years now. I work for the CVOEO, which is the Champlain Valley Office of Economic Opportunity, in the statewide housing advocacy program. So we have, CVOEO is one of the state's 5 community action agencies, and we do work related to social, racial, environmental, and economic justice. Most of the work is within the 4-county area of Chittenden, Franklin, Grand Isle, and Addison. But our statewide work is obviously, as the name says, statewide. So we work with renters, with people experiencing housing discrimination, with folks living in manufactured home communities, with asylees, and also with families exiting homelessness.
A lot of people.
A lot of people.
A lot of individuals, a lot of
Yeah.
families with direct service. That was actually something you and Kate bring that. Michael brings that in a different way with CHT in terms of being connected with real people. And that's critically important. And again, not just Burlington. You're based in Burlington?
Based in Burlington, working statewide. My work is primarily on anti-housing discrimination work and then education and outreach for renters.
A big deal. A big deal. I did rent escrow clinics in the volunteer program, and the education that's needed. I also was the city's code enforcement director twice on an interim basis, and the housing prosecutor for 20 years. And so prosecuting slumlords is something that we know is really important. So in that at the base of that is education for people to know what their rights are, and then they get to make the choices in terms of the balance of risk and benefit that go with that, which leads us to, in a way, why we're here, which is there's a housing crisis. Everybody from the governor to the dog catcher is aware of that all around the state. And so what I think would be really interesting would be to get your perspectives about the crisis that exists right now as you were seeing it in your actual work, right? It could be availability, it can be affordability, it can be discrimination, it could be habitability and the lack of knowledge, it can be bureaucracy and the systems that we've got that maybe haven't been re-looked at for a long time. So I've got you guys to sort of reflect on this. And Mikey, as somebody, sorry, I did that. I always call you Mikey. We've known each other for 50 years. Yeah, why don't you kick us off?
Sure. So I think, we do work from homelessness to home ownership and a wide range of things, and a bunch of loan programs for different folks, mobile homes, and farm worker housing. Housing for people who are homeless and housing them, and as well as shelter activities, counseling and education, a wide range of things. And I can't say that there's nothing that we're not involved with that doesn't have something going on that is just out of reach for most people. So I think that's really important to understand.
For those, like examples.
So like in the context of home ownership, it's just really, home ownership costs are so high. Average home ownership now is $400,000, $500,000, $600,000 in Chittenden County. Almost impossible for a working person or a working family to be able to afford, and even middle-income folks are struggling a bit to get to that place. For renters, it's both habitability, the kind of good housing that people could live in and feel safe and secure. It's the fear of displacement, the fear of gentrification, but it's the affordability, critically, as much as anything, with a big impact on vouchers and the voucher program, really helping the most low-income people. And in homelessness, everybody, we just say, oh, there's the homeless people, which is like saying, oh, that's that one thing. And really, it's a wide range of things, So it's people who are economically homeless, people who are homeless who maybe need a little bit of support to get there, a little bit of navigation, people who need a little bit more than that, maybe supportive housing. And then we have people who are struggling with substance abuse disorder, and a handful of people over here, I like to do, that are just preying on everybody.
Right.
And in that's the crisis that we sort of see in the streets of Burlington. But in the context of everything else, we have so many people who need affordable rental housing. Those people will be people who are homeless need rental housing. They need subsidy as well. They need support to get there. So there's a wide range of things that that group needs. To me, the crisis that we see every day is that crisis as much as anything. And we could really, we do great
crisis
things.
again.
Being homelessness.
Okay.
You know, and really in that context is a lack of good affordable housing stock, a lack of good choices. Now, you know, we can get to the end of our conversation and we could talk about a little wide range of things that we need to do, from backyard development to small, tiny homes, to a whole wide range of things. But it's how to move those folks who are now on the street. And we noted that, and now starting July 1st, a whole pile more people
Absolutely.
being on the street. And where are they going to go? And how are we going to shelter them? That's the first thing we have to do.
Yep.
How are we going to make that transition between shelter to permanent, affordable rental housing?
Yeah.
And that's our work. And to me, that's, I think, what most people are now seeing, because when people complain, oh, the streets of Burlington, blah, 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 that's it.
Yeah.
It's, well, you know what? If they all were housed in a motel, or if they all had a good shelter, or if they had, for those people over here, supportive services, a range of sort of other things, we wouldn't have that. And I think, to me, that's the crisis that we face as a community. I think it shows up in everything, and like in policing and community and in a range of things.
Yes. Yeah. Absolutely. Deal with it. I deal with it, in the council. I deal with it with the encampment right across the street from my house. So it's there. Kate, from your perspective and the connection with the housing crisis, be adjacent to what Michael is saying as opposed to maybe duplicative.
Sure. Well, I'm one of those middle income folks who's sort of stuck in rental housing. I can't complain. Where I live is great. I live, like I said, in a Bright Street Housing Cooperative. It is an affordable housing, mixed income community, and I'm one of those folks who can't afford to buy a house and move out. So that's one affordable housing unit that I'm underhoused, so to speak. And somebody else could be living there, but I can't move out. So I think there are a lot of folks in that situation. The housing vacancy rate, rental housing vacancy rate, is historically low. We have, I think, the worst rental housing vacancy rate in the country.
Continues to be low.
And I work with youth, 18 and 24-year-olds who are old enough to have their own apartments. The rate of youth homelessness has increased by 3. It's gone up 3 times in the last 5 years.
300% is another way to say that.
Yeah,
right?
300% in Vermont. We also work with 12 to 17-year-old unaccompanied homeless youth, and that rate has gone up.
12-year-old unaccompanied?
Unaccompanied homeless youth. That means they left home or were forced out of home.
Wow.
Housing unstable in some way and not with their parent or guardian.
Yeah. Talk about vulnerable.
Yeah, very vulnerable. And that rate has doubled in the last 3 years. And it had doubled over the previous 5 years as well. So we've seen it go up hundreds of percent. And so we have a lot of youth across the state of Vermont who are under the age of 18, who are couch surfing. Not as, street outreach isn't maybe the burning need there, but we have about 20 shelter beds in the whole state, and we have 120 youth in that category. So we just lack housing, we lack services, we need more shelter beds at every age range, and then we need especially housing that can meet the needs of people with complex needs, especially with the youth that we're seeing in our 18 to 24 range. In those programs, we're seeing folks who should not be referred into short and medium-term housing programs get referred into those programs. They need long-term and significant support, and there are 0 supported housing beds for 18 to 24-year-olds in the state right now. So those youth are competing with adults who also need supportive housing, but because they're young and they don't have that like 10 years of chronic homelessness because they're young.
Talk about that bureaucracy issues, right?
Yeah, they don't get prioritized for supportive housing. So we end up serving homeless youth with really significant needs in tenant-based rental assistance programs with a great case manager, but who has to have a pretty large caseload. So yeah, we're experiencing a lot of not enough resources and not the right resources with youth right now. And I think it's not going to get better anytime soon, which is unfortunate, especially with what's happening at the federal level.
Yeah. I mean, you think of it as a systemic problem, and the irony is that you have a governor and a system that has been crying about the need for younger people to come, and for people to come here and to work here and to grow families. There was a report on VPR yesterday about the aging, maybe even this morning, about the aging of Vermont, and us being in one of those states where there are more old people than young people. And this is absolute insanity.
And let me just say, I do think that that's true, and I think it's more true in other parts of the state than it would be where we live right now, because we have a large influx of folks coming, people coming to work here, people who are working remotely now, living here, an industrial sort of development, different kinds of things going on where people are coming for jobs, and so I think that that's why the vacancy rate is so low. And you might go to
the whole state.
Huh?
That's across the
That's
whole
across
state.
the whole state, but a little bit. There's less aging and a little bit more of the sort of the impact of sort of like that kind of thing that you might find in other places.
Yeah, we'll get to some of the drivers of the crisis. Frank, add something that we haven't heard, or amplify something in a different way.
Yeah, definitely. I think if it'd be helpful, I could talk a little bit about just the scope of the problems in terms of numbers. So right now in Vermont, we have a wonderful system called coordinated entry that really enables all the homelessness response system actors to be able to identify who's unhoused and connect them with services, or try and provide them with housing that's available. And so through that, we can really understand like the scope of how many people are truly unhoused in Vermont right now. And again, even that, which is like our best number, we know is an undercount because it only reflects the folks who are actually connected to the system. But even looking at that, we have nearly 5,000 people across Vermont who are currently unhoused. And again, that's an undercount. And so just to give a scope of the problem right now, so we have 5,000 people approximately unhoused. We have 616 household shelter capacity across the entire state. 5,616. And so just to be clear, that 616 is households, not individuals. And so even that's maybe 1,000. Like it's, there's a little bit of give and take there. But anyway, you have a multiple factor worse problem than we have the solution for right now. And so that's why I think from our perspective, and I think everyone here, the General Assistance Emergency Housing Program, which is I think colloquially called the Hotel Motel Program, has been such a vital backstop. And so for at least the folks who the state has identified as vulnerable, so seniors, people with disabilities, pregnant people, people with children, have been able to have access to shelter that they otherwise wouldn't have because shelters are full, or traditional shelters are full. And so that's the kind of world we're living in right now in Vermont. And looking towards the housing side, what we see right now, the Vermont Housing Finance Agency put out the housing needs assessment, which is like, where does Vermont need to be by the end of this decade to address the housing crisis? And it was, I think, between 24 and 36,000 new homes. But I think the most troubling part of that was half had to be affordable to deal with the crisis that we're at.
Talking about, when we talk about affordability, is what's the income and what's the rent that we're,
So
or
30%
the house?
You can't pay more than 30% of your
yeah.
income for rent, and the affordability sort of programs tend to go from less than 120%, less than 100%, less than 80, less than 60, depending upon
Yeah.
the program themselves. But I think most of us are pushing for the 80 to 60% less, knowing that when we get to 30%, people need vouchers regardless of what we build.
Yeah.
But knowing that if we build housing that is half the market rent, let's say right now in Chittenden County, that becomes a little bit more affordable to most people.
So 80% of adjusted gross
Of the
Area
median
median
income.
income.
of what?
Yeah,
Area
80%.
median income.
Area
Yeah.
median
Again, different
income.
programs
Yeah.
will target different things, but
Yeah, but we're talking about people in the what range would you say in terms of dollar amount for
it's
an individual?
80% depending upon the family size.
Yeah.
It's like 80,000, 90,000, 100,000, I think is the number more or less.
So
in terms of
we're
3 or 4
talking about a housing.
3 or 4 people.
Yeah,
you know.
we're talking about a family who could be making
Working.
$80,000 or $90,000. I remember when I worked for the
Combined.
Burlington Free Press and worked for $5 an hour and had a family, and it was kind of crazy.
You probably know these numbers faster than I do, but most of the folks who could need to get into affordable housing are working at fairly low-wage jobs. And even if they got a livable wage, they would still need something in order to be able to afford the rents that currently are happening now in Chittenden County.
Well, more than a
Yeah.
quarter of households in the state, whether they're, well, around a quarter of households, whether they're renters or homeowners, are paying more than 30% of their income. And another half of those are paying more than 50% of their income on housing costs. And when you have a lot of money, half of your income still leaves a lot of money, a decent amount of money for
Right.
food and
Yep.
transportation, healthcare. When you're at a lower income and you're paying 50% of your income on on housing expenses, it doesn't leave much else.
Yes.
A new efficiency apartment will rent for $2,000 now.
I-
500 square feet, 2,000. You do the math. That means you need to make 6,000. That means you need to make $72,000 in order for it to be relatively, to be able to get into that housing in a reasonable way, right? So, and that's the new stuff that's going up. So that's the crisis we're in. That we really need to build a more affordable housing from there.
And Jess, let's sort of focus on the impact on folks' lives, because you see people coming in for services all the time, and so the impact on food security or on medical needs or what have you, transportation. To talk about what you're seeing.
Sure. Yeah, a lot of people are really struggling. So every day we have a helpline, the Vermont Tenants Helpline, where renters can call with any type of question or issue. And every day we hear from people whose rents are being increased by $200, $300, $500 with their lease renewal.
And these are not people who are trashing their places, and these are not people who are so-called deadbeats who are just deciding to rip off their landlord. There's people who have been.
It's across the board, and we also, here we don't. We work primarily with tenants, but in some of the work we do is with landlords, and we hear from landlords, both for-profit and nonprofit, who talk about the increase in costs. It's a tough time for both renters and landlords, and I do think we need to get away from the rhetoric that all landlords are bad, all tenants are good. We have a good landlord right here at CHT.
Yeah.
And so but in any case, so we hear from people all the time who are living in substandard conditions, who have holes in their roof, no hot water, no heat, pests, and are afraid to complain. They're afraid of retaliation because even a substandard home is better than no home at all.
Yeah.
And we also hear from a lot of people who can't find housing because of, for financial reasons, but also for discrimination reasons. One of the realities of a really tight housing market with a low vacancy rate is that it can be easier for discrimination to happen. Some of that discrimination is intentional and malicious, but most of it isn't. Most of it is based on implicit bias and things that are not intentional, but the result is still discriminatory practices and people who are not able to have choice and access to housing simply because of who they are, what country they're from, who they love, whether they have kids or a disability. And so this tight housing market really disproportionately impacts people who have traditionally been subject to discrimination and exclusion.
Yeah, sort of hides the
Yeah.
all of those biases into just a choice of somebody who to make it easier. We have spent almost half of the time talking about problems and stuff. Let's talk about solutions, about reforms, about the little and the bigger and the bigger and the big things that we need to do over the short and the medium and then the long term, because these are systemic problems, and nothing gets solved immediately, and never ever will one thing ever solve all of these issues. So let's throw some stuff out on the wall. Let's go with you, Jess.
Oh, I get to start.
Or-
Lucky me. I get to solve the world's problems right here.
No. Give us one idea or
One idea.
thing that
Oh my gosh.
that's out there, or you can pass and we can go to other
No,
people
I can
too.
go. I brought a list.
My goodness.
Well, I think they're the things that are needed and achievable. They're the things that we're already doing that we need to recognize work and do better. And then there are the big ideas and things that are working in other places and other countries.
So
but I'll just start with some well, maybe not low-hanging fruit, but if we had a reasonable way to stabilize rents in a way that could protect renters from some of the things that we mentioned and some of these really obscene increases, but also while allowing housing providers to cover their costs, if there was a balanced way to do that. If we could have some just cause eviction policies that to ensure that there's a reason for someone having to leave their home, paired with reforms to the current eviction process that to ensure representation for tenants when they do face eviction for cause, and that can speed up the process when needed. Both of these things have been proposed, I don't know how many times over the years, I mean, for decades, and there's always a lot of pushback at that, at the state legislature for that.
Let's pivot to Kate, who has had a bird's eye view of the pushback at the legislature and your perspectives on that. We've had Burlington's Just Cause sitting there despite almost 70% of the people having voted for it. I believe those were the numbers. We've almost overcame a veto, one vote short, and now it hasn't. And five other, or maybe there are five total, cities and towns in the state have passed charter changes and are waiting for our fine citizen legislature to support the people that are suffering here. And you've got a governor who already vetoed it once and probably has threatened to veto it again. So talk to us about that, what you hear from people and the politics, to be quite honest, of it.
Yeah, I mean, I guess if there's a reform that I would advocate for, it's, elect different people across the state of Vermont. We will not take up just cause eviction in the political climate that we're at, even for discussion. It won't even have a discussion at the committee level, I don't think.
Is there any reasonableness in terms of the conversation? You heard what Jess was talking about. You've heard all this other stuff. Like, does that ever make it into the conversation at the legislature?
I mean, we've talked about just cause eviction a fair amount. I think one of the complaints that we've heard, and granted, you have to take into consideration that the large majority of the legislature are landlords. How else can you work for $15,000 a year to be a policymaker if you're not making a profit off of people's housing or other passive forms of income? So we have a lot of people there who have a strong bias towards the perspective of the landlord and have had really awful experiences with tenants in some cases. And so those are very viscerally part of the conversation for them. They struggled for 2 years and lost $600,000 for one tenant, or et cetera. So we hear a lot of those kind of stories. So
A little bit high, but yeah.
Yeah. I mean, the story is.
No, I did. I heard a story like that. Actually, I won't name names, but I'll just say that there's this fear. There's this really visceral fear that even though the just cause eviction charter change won't prevent landlords from evicting the folks that they're talking about, actually. They don't want to move forward with that because they want leverage. They want something. If they're gonna pass just cause eviction, they want something, and they want expedited evictions. So and right now we have a huge eviction backlog. It's taking a really long time to evict folks who have violated their leases and could be evicted for cause.
Yeah.
So that's a problem. And that's where the conversation landed in the last session, was that until we can clear out the backlog of evictions, then we won't get any movement on just cause eviction. So I do think I would just, if I have to just say one thing, we've done a lot over the last few years in housing policy. We're doing a lot of the right things. We have been doing a lot of the right things for decades in Vermont. There are forces beyond our control in some ways. There is a massive concentration of wealth in, the 60-plus population in the country. It's the most income inequality we've ever seen in the country, actually more so than prior to the Great Depression. And so, yeah, it's just going to be a hard time for folks right now. There isn't enough housing. We've had a huge influx of second homeowners. We've seen a huge increase in short-term rentals across the state. We're taking baby steps towards regulating those things, and I think we should put more effort into figuring out what to do about short-term rentals, for example. I think we should be helping the hospitality industry innovate so that they can provide the kind of product that people get when they get a short-term rental. People want to stay in an apartment. They want to stay in a house. Other markets are starting to have apart hotels and things like that. I think we need to disincentivize short-term rentals so we can open up housing. Those are the homes that people used to be able to buy when they wanted to start a family. Those are a lot of apartments in places where people want to live. Could be market rate units, not affordable units necessarily, but we're experiencing a lack of housing at every level. So we need to do something about that. And we should raise taxes on second homes. We need to tax what you want less of. It's not that we necessarily want less of second home ownership, but there should be a little higher bar.
So before we pivot to Frank, was that raised? Was the tax on second homes raised this year? And what was the discussion at the legislature?
So, we've been talking about it for years at this point. We are taking movement forward. That was part of the bargain with the education bill, the education transformation bill that we passed, H454, was that we will disaggregate our non-homestead tax rate, and then we'll start talking about how to tax second homes. In some places like Addison County, where there's a large amount of agricultural land, just bringing second homes up to the same level as owner-occupied homes in terms of property tax rate is going to be a huge improvement. So there will still be a lot of debate about what rate we're going to set for second home property taxation, but at least that conversation will take another step forward.
Okay.
In terms of short-term rentals, I've introduced bills. Another bill was introduced this year by my colleague, Larry Sakowicz, and you immediately get 1,000 emails from short-term rental owners.
Yeah.
There's a strong lobby there.
There is. We had that here.
Yeah.
I was part of the, a winning coalition to allow them, but to tax them and to regulate them. And then we've just gotten a decision from the Vermont Supreme Court that will allow us to enforce. And I mean, part of the problem that I see is a sort of a lack of capacity by municipalities, as well as a lack of will to actually then put in place the infrastructure to enforce the regulations that they've got. It's like habitability. If you're not committed to doing it, then it's just a performance, and it's not much better than just doing what you were saying the landlord legislators are doing in terms of just cause eviction.
Yeah.
So, okay, Frank. Low hanging, higher hanging, big kangaroo jump.
I mean, I'll start with kind of the immediate, because I think there are things our governor can immediately do, like today, to really mitigate harm in Vermont. So I'd mentioned earlier the General Assistance Emergency Housing Program. And so within the GA program, which is the hotel motel program, we have caps. And so individuals, so to get into the program, you have to be eligible. So you have to meet that strict criteria that I mentioned earlier. But even for those folks who the state of Vermont has identified as highly vulnerable, still have caps. And so they can only access the program during the non-winter
What's
period.
the reason for that besides, is it just cost?
I mean,
Yeah,
that's
it's
the most
cost.
common,
It's cost.
common argument is cost.
Yeah.
And so folks are eligible for 80 nights in the program per calendar year outside of the winter program. And to give a little context on that, right now to move someone on average from homelessness into housing takes over a year. And so, I mean, it's not connected to the reality on the ground by any means. But so within the GA program, you may recall during the debate around the Budget Adjustment Act this past legislative session, the House and the Senate passed legislation that would have extended the winter weather program through the end of June. So it would have said that between April 1st, when the winter weather program ended in June, folks who were in the program eligible could stay in the program and not have to worry about maxing out their cap. It would be relaxed. The governor vetoed the BAA and instead issued an executive order that just extended that, waived those caps through the end of this month for a narrow set of highly vulnerable people. So just people who are, he identified as medically vulnerable and families with children. So those folks received, there was an executive order. They were told that they were allowed to stay in the program through the remainder of this month. And the executive order in the plain language said the 80-day cap, quote, shall be waived for that period.
Okay, yeah.
So fast forward to, I think it was June 4th, folks that were in the hotel motel program under that executive order received a letter from the Economic Services Division informing them that, hey, haha, all the days that you've used up until now during this executive order period count towards those 80 nights.
Yeah.
And so those folks who thought they were again going to be eligible for a new set of 80 nights next month are now not going to be eligible for a new set of 80 months.
There was no whoops, oh, we made a mistake.
No, no notice.
And how does their attorney justify, has anybody like taken them to task in either a court or?
I know there's lots of conversations about that right now and trying to get clarity. And we were on a call, many of us were on a call this morning with Economic Services Division where we were able to finally get numbers about the impact of that change. And so we're looking at nearly 1,000 Vermonters who are under that executive order are going to be out by between the 23rd of this month and July 1st.
In a few days.
In a few days.
Yeah.
And,
Yeah,
sorry.
yeah.
I was just going to say, and what that looks like on the ground, because there isn't shelter capacity.
Yeah.
There's no place for people to go. Is that social service agencies and municipalities have been ordering tents and sleeping bags. So that is the answer of a so-called civilized society, is to send people out with as much care as possible
Sure.
to fend for themselves.
90 children.
Well, and
90 children
Yeah, and
on the street starting July.
you know, so like I said, I live around the corner from here in the old North End, and at the top of the 127 bike path, which used to be the entrance to the old dump, is an area which is big enough to, you know, deal with garbage trucks, and there is an encampment there. It's not the first one. We've had them over the period of time people complain about tents just popping up right here, in this little, I think it's actually
park.
George Little Park.
Yeah.
There was a tent there, and people get upset about that. The citizens, or like people in the community, they're like, how dare they, when they have to see them, but, where are people going? Where are people going?
And then we have the responsibility too as a community to make sure that people are safe. And so if people are being sent out with tents and allowed to camp in public spaces, then we should be providing facilities so that they can, porta potties and health facilities and people to make sure that there's food and water and all the things that people need to stay alive.
Yeah, and are fine people at the state, are they doing that kind of stuff?
No.
No, but I think this is like in terms of what the state can do. I mean, the
Right,
governor to solve this literally just needs to rescind that letter and say that I'm actually going to actually follow the words of my executive order and waive it. And I think that's, that's not a permanent fix. That is a Band-Aid.
A reprieve
that keeps
to something
people-
that's terrible,
Yeah.
right?
folks-
Yeah. So,
But-
and how long a reprieve?
It would just be another 80 days, but it gets us another 80 days, and it gives more time. Some of those folks may be getting close to finding housing. When you pull people out and you just, disconnect them from the services that they're receiving, it makes it that much harder for them to kind of move into housing, or if they have a job, to stay in their job, or to kind of stay in the community and to keep getting the services they need. So I think that's a very short-term, tangible thing. that can be
Governor,
done.
do the right thing.
Yep.
That's right.
But in terms of long-term, I think there's lots of things that our state can be doing. I think one of the really frustrating things has been a lot of the debate recently at the state legislature has been around regulatory reform. And while regulatory reform is absolutely something that should have happened, needs to happen, that is not the solution to our housing crisis, affordable housing crisis. You can remove all the regulations in the world, and that's not going to impact construction costs and materials costs and those things that are actually the major drivers of cost right now. And so what we as a state really need to do is invest in our affordable housing infrastructure. We have amazing housing trusts across the state. We have an amazing agency in the Vermont Housing and Conservation Board that makes sure that we have the most efficient kind of distribution of those funds to meet the need. And so we need to just convince our legislators and the governor that we need to make these investments. And I think one way of doing that is really trying to move away from the rhetoric that's been we've seen at the State House, which is it just costs too much. Well, it does cost money, but it costs more money to ignore the problem, because when you ignore the problem, we have more people unhoused in the community, more people going to the ER, more people who police and first responders are having to respond to in a much more inefficient and costly way. And so if you actually put all the numbers together, it's actually much more efficient and effective use of tax dollars to invest in the solution than to invest in these really regressive forms that we would be doing otherwise.
And are there ideas in terms of lowering the cost? I know that the questions related to what I think manufactured housing, but I'm not, I know like there's a development.
And the regulatory reform stuff and these other things can impacted by 5%, 10%, different form of materials, 5 or 10%. And that might have some value on the private market to lower that.
Yeah.
But as Frank said, the private market and regulatory reform is okay. The fact that some communities are now building more housing in where they used to, basically restrict it, which is basically an old race-based kind of approach to things. The fact that that's changing throughout most of the state and even the county, that's good. That's great. But it doesn't go to the affordable housing need at all. And I was ready to jump in, but you go ahead, because
I was
defer
just
to
going
you.
to say
Yeah,
that
good.
the thing to pair with, what Frank has said here is we do need to raise more revenue that is specific to housing in order to fund more affordable housing, because as you know, the federal government is chipping away at federal funding.
Yeah.
We've had pretty good revenue at the state level from our own taxes, but we keep plowing that into lowering people's property tax rates rather than building more affordable housing, which would, of course, increase the property tax pool. So we really just need to raise more revenue, and that, I think, is going to have to be focused at the top income earners.
Okay.
Who have the capacity to pay more.
I was going to say, so the one of the ideas is to be focusing on those in our state family that have the ability and the most to be able to.
There was a bill 2 years ago, which basically was going to raise enough money for services, shelters short term, and build at the time, as we believed, all the affordable housing that we would need over a 10-year period, taxing a certain income, higher income, and that bill failed in the Senate. That bill would have been dramatic in terms of its impact. It was basically, we were very successful, decently enough, with the COVID funds that come in, and as a result, we have a couple hundred units coming online this year, which is a dramatic amount. Yeah. It's usually been 40 or 60, but a couple of hundred, and that's going on throughout the state using all those COVID funds. This would have picked up the COVID money and kept it going for 10 more years and build that 200, 300, 400 units around the state that was really needed, and that would have really resolved with a longer-term vision, short-term supportive services, shelters, moving people to permanent housing. I think that's the big idea that came this close just 2 years ago.
How much did it fail by?
It fell by.
So it passed.
Yes,
it passed with near supermajority in the Senate and a supermajority in the House, and then the governor vetoed it, and then we could not override the veto by one vote, and that was Senator Thomas Chittenden.
Thanks, Tom.
There it is.
Plus the Republicans, of course.
So that was it. That would have been, frankly, our discussion would have been, how are we proceeding with the use of those funds in order to get the shelters up and running that we need, to get the housing built that we really needed. Completely different conversation.
I mean, look at the fight that we've had over food in Burlington, right? With the free food program. I mean, if you're talking about services, I mean, that is feeding a lot of people who were absolutely in need. It was a long arc solution, but we would have still dealt with this crisis right now, but it would have been a long arc solution too. Shelter capacity as well as regular housing. And Senator Chittenden and others, their replacement for that is what?
Nothing.
Nothing.
Yeah.
And the governor, I hate to say this, but I guess that I get to do this because I'm a politician, and I get to name names, and but it's unconscionable because unless you don't care and you think that people are garbage, and then you throw them out, you send them to Coventry to the landfill, then you got to do something about it. And if you're going to block people from doing what's necessary when it's really clear, then you have an obligation as a public servant, if you care, to do something about it. It's sort of like the people in the just cause, in my mind. If you have a problem with the backlog, then and that's your justification, then you've got a responsibility to figure out how to undo that backlog so that this other piece can happen. You can't use it as an excuse. And now I'm getting myself all pissed off. So, so I'm gonna tone myself down because Mikey's known me for a long time. It's easy enough for me to do this, but it's outrageous. And so you guys who have to work with those folks, you don't have to get all upset. Right, me, I'll carry that burden for you because I don't get it. It's just wrong. It's just fundamentally wrong, and it's economically, from the standpoint of the health and vitality of this state, it is regressive. Yeah. It is reactionary, and if the solution really in the short term is to replace them, then they all need to be replaced.
For all the people who are upset about what Burlington downtown looks like, the solution is to build more housing and build more affordable housing for those folks.
Are you upset about property taxes? Build more housing.
Build more affordable housing. You got to be able to do that in order to solve the solution of getting people who are sleeping on the street into regular housing. That's what's going on.
So we've got.
But there's more. There's a couple of more things.
I want to hear more because we've got 10 minutes. And
there's a right of first refusal. How about that one?
I would like that. It's actually on my list of progressive.
So we've been thinking, of course, with the cost of construction and housing being so high, we still need to develop new housing because that's what's important. But what we've seen in Winooski and other places is displacement and gentrification happening at a much higher level, right? It's happened in the Old North End, luckily, it's happening to some extent. Certainly housing costs have gone up, but there is still like enough permanent affordable housing so that there's a 25-30% range of folks who can still
Thank you, Community Land Trust.
Thank you. Well, thank you. Housing policy, social housing dating back to the 80s, right?
Yes.
So I think that now we see lots of these rental housing being owned by private owners being sold, and sort of those prices going up. What we call naturally occurring affordable housing, or housing which is maybe middle income, maybe slightly below middle income, that now gets jacked up because somebody comes and does all this stuff, all this work on the housing. To me, the right of first refusal and the opportunity to either create co-ops or simply put it into a nonprofit use and stabilizing the rents, improving the property, giving people just cause, because we do just cause,
Right.
giving people the opportunity to sort of always be there if they want to live there, those kinds of things. To me, I think that's worth really good conversation.
Good conversation.
And there's a precedent for that already, and for manufactured home
Yeah,
communities.
and it
There's
works
state
so
law
well.
says
So-
that if a manufactured home community goes for sale, the residents have the right of first, essentially the right of first refusal.
Has that been talked about at the State House? Has this been talked about at the State House? Yeah.
I mean, I would say that's one of the ideas that is like short-term rental regulation that we talk about, and then it will never be discussed.
If we bring a charter change,
It will not be discussed.
we will not discuss it. But
In this political climate. It's just a really bad political climate if you believe in social investment in housing, investing public resources to build housing. The governor now has more power than he has had throughout most of his time serving as governor, and his approach to affordable housing is to deregulate.
yeah.
And he himself is a builder, and so once he stops being the governor and goes back to being a builder, I think what he wants is to be able to build housing as affordable housing. What's going to make housing affordable is that you can build it as cheaply as possible, don't have to jump through as many hoops. And I do think that we need to do some regulatory reform. I think we could do more by right zoning, for example, for affordable housing projects, like we pushed that far. But there are a lot of really innovative ideas in terms of how to shape public investment, how to most effectively allow folks to have ownership of their property. That it can't even break through in the State House right now. It'll take years. It can be done. I just think it'll take years of really concerted effort, and it has to be a statewide effort, and you need a coalition of Republicans and Democrats to come on board. A different governor probably.
Yeah. But part of it is putting these ideas out there, because if they are never out there, then you just don't know that they can exist. So we have to do it. Give me another. Give us. So you've got right of first refusal.
Yeah, I mean, I think that there's different forms of construction that have been, I think, interesting for me, and I can't say I'm totally embracing, but the ADUs and the tiny homes, people see that as a lower cost sort of opportunity to create more units. I don't see that as sort of the place that we want to hang out with. We support that, actually. We actually have loans for that right now through the VHIP program in the state of Vermont. But the point is, I don't think it's permanently affordable, and so those things are good for a bit. And I think a little bit of the state money going for short-term stuff is okay. But my fear is actually, here's a policy issue, question, and concern. That short-term stuff is becoming only the thing we want to do, at least at some very conservative nature of things. Let's just do short-term stuff. And suddenly the public investment is lost within 5 years, 10 years. We have that Northgate experience. We know 330 families were going to get displaced because of a short-term, even though it was even 25 years, a short-term decision.
King Street. I mean, all of that
King
work
Street,
that we did in the 70s.
200 units in the King Street neighborhood are permanently affordable. Those people, those families, that King Street Center is there because those places are permanently affordable. And if we had to invest in those over and over again, Gus Siligowi says it was $22 million back then, it's $230 million now. That's all the money in the world. That's 2 years worth of the funding we were talking about.
Yeah.
And why do that? Why even think that that's the right investment? We know that the people who supported permanently affordable housing in Burlington were conservatives, were Republicans who said, yes, when we do the public investment, let's hold, this is crazy nowadays to think this way.
Well, Alan Gear was great. I served with Alan.
But the point
on
was,
council.
the point was that there was an understanding that the public investment should be held by the public and not just given away so easily, and that the long-term affordability really made a difference in people's lives.
Yeah.
We got 5 minutes. There are 4 of you. Give us some last words, Jess, and
Last
then we'll go around.
words. Oh my gosh.
Yeah, so it went pretty quick, didn't it?
It did. Well, I think we can look at the new ideas, and we can look at the other things that are already happening and working, like community housing trusts, land trusts, housing co-ops, and then other shared ownership models like the Vermont Real Estate Co-op. Ways that people can band together in a community, decide what's important, put their money towards it, and make positive change. Programs like Home Share Vermont are really valuable and underused, where we're taking homes that are too big for whoever's living there and matching them. There are things like that that we could be doing more of and we could be supporting. We definitely need more money for perpetually affordable housing, more money for supportive services to help people be sustainable in their homes and so they can keep their homes. And then there are like fun things. Like I was just learned about this program in Cincinnati called Cincinnati Rental Partnerships, where renters agree to a 5-year lease and they agree to do some property management, be involved in the management of their building, and after 5 years they get $10,000 that can be reinvested in the building or they can walk away. And there's a way that we can help people build equity in different ways that are a little more creative, and maybe our legislators might be more amenable to. You
send me that link to do
sure,
that. I'm a shameless stealer of great ideas. Right.
I mean, I think one thing we can do at a rhetorical level that I think will have really big policy benefits long term is we really need to kind of reimagine our conception of what public safety means in our communities. So if you think about what public safety means, too often it means like we regress to police and prisons. That's public safety. Yep. When if you actually talk to folks in communities, public safety is a safe roof over your head, clean environment, quality public education, access to food, access to public transportation. Those are the things that really make our communities safe. And yet when you're at the legislature, for example, and you're talking about something that has to do with police and prisons, costs are not relevant. So, for example, there was a bill last year that really ratcheted up. It created on felony larceny threshold change. There was no fiscal note. There was no talk about the cost of this bill. When you know that's going to lead a lot more people into our prison system, and obviously the cost of just incarcerating people, but the collateral harms of having a criminal record. So when we're talking about police and prisons, we never talk about the costs, even though there's no evidence holistically that shows that that is an effective use if we're talking about making our community safer. Prison is not a solution to public safety or to harm reduction if you're actually looking at the data. And so instead of that, we need to kind of, when we're at the legislature now and we're talking about the hotel motel program or affordable housing, the question is always, how are we going to pay for it? That's the wrong question. Not only can we show you that it's more cost effective, but also these are the core role of government is to ensure the basic needs and safety of its residents, and this is how you do it. So not only is it the smarter thing to do, but it's also the thing you should be doing. So we really need to kind of redefine that.
Yeah, good.
Yeah, I mean, I do think that there's probably a little bit more that we could be doing with the resources that we have. We can, like you mentioned, there are some really unique ideas that we could implement that make possibly more effective use of our resources. But I think that Vermont needs a housing advocacy movement. If I could ask for anything right now, it would be an army of grassroots activists across the state who are educated on a housing policy platform and who are lobbying my colleagues around the state. It's culture change that we need right now around housing. I work in housing first programming. I have seen firsthand the difference that having stable housing has made for me as a single parent, and then in our clients around the state, turns people's lives around to know that they have a safe place to live. And we just need to win. We need to win hearts and minds,
Yeah.
I guess, of the people who are in power, because we can't get anything done without them on board.
Yeah.
I don't know what more we need to do, but I think that is actually our primary need, because we already know what to do. We already know what we need. We had a plan. We just needed some money to implement it.
Mike, last word?
Well, let me just say that these are the smartest people around, and everything that they've said I've supported. I think it's really, really good. Thanks, Gene, for doing this. But I would say, when I did economic development, what people would say is you need community safety, you need good parks, you need good schools, and after that, economic activity would happen, you know? And I think that sometimes the governor, who is very keen on economic activity, doesn't realize that he's failing, at least on the public safety issue, when he leaves so many people homeless.
Right.
That's the connection. I don't understand it either.
Yeah.
I don't get it. I don't understand how that is not something that needs to be paid attention to. We can't have economic prosperity in a way that we really want to unless those things are really, really worked through.
Yeah.
There's lots of great little programs like mobile home lending programs and farm worker housing programs that we didn't get to talk about that are all good. I know you're running out of time, but
We're out of time.
Thank you.
Kevin is being great there. I really appreciate the folks at. Oh, actually, we have a minute or so, at least on that clock.
let me
there.
go back then.
Yeah. But so I want to thank you. This has been great. We can't nearly cover enough, thank you all. I hope you found this to be interesting, and look forward to talking to you again at our next show. Thanks. Have a great night.